Hello and welcome to the second part of the third recording in the Azure Demo Series. So we'll just carry on from where we stopped in the last recording, and what we'll be covering will be vNet peering and custom routing in Azure Virtual Networks. So let's proceed with the rest of the exercise. So again, the instruction that we're following, if I bring that up here, we're currently in the lab-based section, so we've concluded the first part in the last recording. In the lab-based section, what we'll do is we'll start by configuring vNet peering. Let's get that started. So if I scroll this up, so what's the goal? The goal in this first exercise is to use the Azure portal to configure vNet peering. And in the first task, our goal is to configure vNet peering on 205.33d0201 vNet to the 0202 vNet. So let's go ahead and start with that. And then after we finish, we'll configure vNet peering the other way around, which will be from 0202 to 0201. By the way, all these resources were resources that were created by the script that we ran to prepare our environment earlier in the first part of this recording. So let's get to that. So to do that, if I go to on the resource groups, actually if I just go on the virtual networks here, and then if I look for the 0201 virtual network, and then if I click on that, and then go on the peerings. So on the peerings, if I click on add to add a new peering, and then I'll specify the name to be 0201 to 0202. I'll leave my subscription and I'll go ahead and select my virtual network, which will be where I'm configuring to 0202 in this case. I'll select that. Allow virtual network access, ensure that that is set to enabled. So what this would do is it's going to allow resources within, going back, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to configure this vNet peering between these two networks. And allow network access means allow resources that are in this network to automatically be able to communicate with resources in this virtual network. So that's what that configuration does. And the other thing that will enable is this forwarded traffic. We'll set that to enabled. And what it does is, because if I go back to our diagram, because we're going to be eventually configuring this virtual machine as a router, so that's what this R signifies in this. We're going to be configuring this as a router. What we're going to do, or what we're going to need to do, is, for example, if this virtual machine will be forwarding traffic on behalf of a virtual machine in this subnet to the internet, the reply is going to be coming from the internet, going through this virtual machine and going back to this virtual machine, in order to allow traffic that is not originating from the paired vNet to be able to come through. So traffic, when it's coming back, it's not originating from a paired vNet, it's originating from the internet, but it's coming through a paired vNet to our vNet. In order for us to be able to allow that, we have to enable this configuration. So if you go ahead and enable that, excuse me, and then click OK. So that's task number 1 completed after this is successful. So the next thing that we'll need to do for task number 2 is we need to repeat the same on 0202. So let's click on that and then click on peerings also, and then add a new peering connection. And in this case, we'll call the name 0202 to 0201. Choose our 01 virtual network. Ensure that that's enabled. Enable forwarded traffic also, and then click on OK. And then we're going to wait for that to be successful and then verify that the connection is active. So we'll be able to tell that from the peering status, and we can see that is connected. So we're good. Let's move on to the next exercise. So the next exercise, we're going to configure vNet peering based service chaining. What does that mean? What that means, to break it down in a simple term, is we want to configure that if this virtual machine in this vNet wants to communicate to this virtual machine, the traffic is routed through this other virtual machine. So that's what we're doing. So we're going to configure routing, not to just go directly from this machine to this, but to go from this machine through this other router to this. And this is very useful if you have some type of security appliance like the Sophos XG firewall that I record a lot of videos on. Protecting your Azure environment, you can have traffic going to the XG firewall using this method, and then after security checks, it gets delivered to the other machine in the other subnet. Let's go ahead and start with that. The first thing that we'll need to do is to configure IP forwarding on VM1, which is 0201 VM1. Let's go back to our diagram. 0201 VM1, we want to configure IP forwarding on this machine on its network interface. And the reason for that, again, if I go back to this, is to enable its network interface to be allowed to receive and forward traffic. So by default, a network interface can only receive traffic that's been sent to it. It cannot forward traffic on behalf of another machine. But as this machine is going to be configured as a router, going back to our diagram again, we need to ensure that IP forwarding is enabled on its network interface card. Let's go ahead and do that now. So to do that, going back to my Azure Lab VM, if I go on the virtual machines and then select my VM1 0201 VM1 virtual machine, not 0202 but 0201. If I click on that and then click on the networking. On the networking, I have my network interface for this virtual machine here. If I click on that network interface and under IP configuration, this is where I can enable IP forwarding. I'll set that to enabled and I'll go ahead and save that configuration. So once that is successful, we can move on to the next task. So that should not take long to be successful. And there we go, that's successful. Let's move on to the next task. Next task will be to configure user-defined routing. And user-defined routing, what that means is, let's break down the goals that we have for this task. We'll create a custom route table. We'll call it this name. And within the custom route table, we'll set a configuration to say traffic that's going to our remote virtual network, send it to VM1. In other words, what we want to do here is we're going to create a new routing table that we're going to apply to this subnet so that the subnet knows that traffic that's going to this VM or just to this network, don't just send it by yourself through the default Azure route path, rather send it to 10004, which is this machine that we're going to configure to be our router. So that's essentially what we want to do with our route table. Let's go ahead and do that. Again, going back to our Azure VM environment, if I click on new, and then if I go on the networking, I can click on route table, and then I can specify a name for my route table here. So I'll copy the name, and then for the resource group, I'll excuse me, I'll select the 0202 resource group, and then leave the location, and then click OK to that. So once that's created successfully, I'll go ahead and create custom routes within that route table. So it's going to be empty by default. And that's done. I can click on go to resource here, or I can search here for route tables to go under the route table console. So going to resource here, I'm under the route table. I can click on routes and then click on add a new route. And I'm only going to be adding one. I'll give it a name, custom routes to the 0201 vNet. Address prefix will be the address space for that remote vNet that I'm paired with. I'll change the next stop to virtual appliance, and then I'll put in the IP address of 0201 VM1. So essentially saying to it, anything that's going to this vNet address space, send it to 10.0.0.4. If I go ahead and click OK to that, that should save the root. But one thing that happens is once the root is created and it's saved, this still does not apply to this subnet. I need to associate this subnet with that root table for that configuration to apply. So that's the next task that we'll do. Let's bring this up. So the next task that we'll do is we're going to associate the root table to the subnet one of D0202 vNet. So let's go to do that. I do that by going on the subnet under the root table, click on associate, select my virtual network, which is 0202, and my subnet, which is subnet 1. And then if I click OK to that, that's to associate the virtual network. So let's move on to the next task. Task number 3, in this case, be to configure routing on an Azure VM running Windows Server 2016. And our goal is to connect to 0201 VM1. So by the way, all these machines that were deployed have public IP addresses. So that's why we'll be able to connect to them to their public IP address. But the goal in this task is to connect to this machine. And after connecting to this machine, what do? We're going to configure it as a router to route traffic. We're also going to enable ICMPv4 through its firewall so that we can test using ICMP later. So let's go ahead to do that. So on this, if I go on the virtual machines, select 0201 VM1, and under the overview section, I should say the public IP. If I copy that and then bring up remote desktop and then paste the IP there and then click on connect. I'll put in the username, so they were all created with username of student and password of pa55w.audi. So you'll see that in the document, by the way. If I click OK to that, I'll say don't ask me again, and I'll click yes. So I'll probably be pausing this recording and then come back once we're fully logged in. So what we're going to be doing next is we're going to install a server role called remote access, and then select the routing role feature for us to be able to do routing with that Windows virtual machine. I'll click no to this. So Server Manager may take a while to show up, so what I'll do is I'll pause the recording. I'll resume once it's all fully loaded. Okay, so Server Manager is all fully loaded now. If I click on the Manage and then click Add Roles and Features, and here I'll click Next, ensure that that's selected, and click Next and Next again. Select the Remote Access role and then click Next, and then Next again on the features. And then on the role services, if you select routing, add all the required features, and then click on Next. On the role services for IIS, just click on Next, and then click on Install. So this is going to take a while to install. I'll pause the recording, and then I'll come back once it finishes. So the installation completed successfully. If I go ahead and click Close, then on the tools, if I select routing and remote access here, and then if I go ahead and click on that. So then if I click on 0201 VM1 here, right click and click on Configure and enable routing and remote access. And then on the wizard, if I click Next. In the configuration screen, if I click on Custom Configuration and click on Next, and then select LAN routing, then click Next, and then click on Finish. So it should proceed with the configuration. Ask me to start the service. I'll go ahead and click on Start Service. And what we're essentially doing is we're configuring this Windows virtual machine as a router so that it's capable of routing traffic that's sent to it. So once we've done that, that's all we need to do. We'll minimize that. The other thing that I'll do is if I click on Tools and then go on the Windows Firewall with Advanced Security. And if I expand this a bit, if I go on the inbound rules, the rule that I want is file and print sharing. And if I expand this a bit, the one I want is the one that says ICMPv4 in. If I right click and enable that rule, that's it done. We've configured this machine as a router, and we've also enabled the Windows Firewall for ICMP traffic to be able to pass through it. So let's go to the next task. So the next thing that we need to do is exercise 3 now, and task 1, which will be to configure Windows Firewall with advanced security on Azure VM. So the goal of this particular task is to again connect to 0201 VM2 this time and enable ICMPv4 through it. So what we want to do is we want to connect to this machine this time. We've configured this as a router and allowed ICMPv4 through. Now we want to enable ICMPv4 through this machine so that we can get a success result when we're testing. Let's go ahead and do that. Again, back to my lab virtual machine. If I go on the virtual machines here, 0201 VM2 is what I want this time. And I need to copy this public IP, bring up remote desktop connection and paste the public IP there, and then click on connect. Username is student and password. I'll copy and paste that for my instructions. You can do the same. I'll go ahead and select the option not to ask me again and click yes. So it's logging me in now. What I'll do again is I'll pause this recording. Once it fully logged me in, I'll resume the recording and we'll continue from there. So Server Manager is fully loaded. If I click Tools and then go on the Windows Firewall with Advanced Security, and I'll do the same thing that I did earlier, which is go search for file and print sharing, ICMPv4 in, and I'm going to enable this rule, and then I can minimize this. So let's move on to the next task, which will be let's test that everything is working properly. So to do that, we're going to have to log into 0202 VM1 this time around and test connection to 0201 VM2. So this is the final step that we've configured everything. We've configured our vNet peering, we've configured this machine as a router, and we've configured ICMP through it, and we've configured ICMP to this machine also. So now we're going to test from this machine and ensure that if it wants to send traffic here, it goes through our router, which then routes it to here. So that's what we want to test now. And for that, we need to log into this machine. Let's go ahead and do that now. If I go on the virtual machines, 0202 VM1 this time, and I'll get my public IP address. And what I'll do is I'll bring up remote desktop connection, paste my public IP address and click on connect. Type in the username student and the password and click OK to that. Again, don't ask me again for these connections and click yes. So once they logged into the machine, I'll bring up Windows PowerShell and then I'll test the connection. So let's go back to the diagram. I'm currently logging into 10.0.4.4 and I'm going to try to test connection to 10.0.1.4. So type PowerShell. By the way, I'll just click no on this and type PowerShell here. right click, and I'm going to run it as an administrator. I'll make the font larger to make it easier for you to see. Okay, and the command I'm going to be running is this command. Testnet connection computer name 10.0.1.4. Again, if I cancel this and if I just do a quick ipconfig, I'm on 10.0.4.4. So I'm doing that from 10.0.4.4 over here to 10.0.1.4. And I want to see the path of the traffic. So let's go ahead and run that. So I press enter to that. And we can see, did it succeed? Pink succeeded, so that's true, that's nice. And then if we look at the route, so if you can see the route here, the route goes through 10.0.0.4 and then goes to 10.0.1.4. Let's verify that that is what we expect. So from here, it goes to 10.0.0.4 and then to 10.0.1.4. So our vNet peering and custom routing is all configured correctly. A scenario that you use something like this, as I mentioned again, is where you have something like a Surface XG firewall doing protection and you're routing traffic to it for security checks or for deep packet inspection. So the last thing or the last task of every lab that we do will be to clean up our environment, and we'll be using our script again this time. Not to sound like a broken record here, but this is one of the reasons why you shouldn't be doing this in a production environment, because you'll be wiping resources and you don't want an accident to happen. So in this case, let's go remove the resources that we've created. If I go back to my lab VM and ensure that I bring up PowerShell, and I'll first of all set the execution policy to unrestricted, A for allow, or yes to all. I'm going to go ahead and import the remove 20533D environment, and then if I type R for allow it to run, then I will just run the command to remove the environment. It's going to ask me to log into my Azure account. I put in my Azure account there. And then put in my account password. So what you will probably do in this case, because I've seen it do this in the past, is it's going to automatically detect that I just completed lab 2 based on the resource groups that I have, and then it's going to ask me, I'm going to be deleting all the resource groups that were created as part of lab 2. Do I want to proceed? If I type yes and press enter, it's going to start to delete all the resource groups, starting from 0201 all the way to 0205. So it's going to start deleting resources and this, and then it's going to go up to 0205. So I think if I go back to this document, that takes about 20 minutes to complete. So give it about 20 minutes to complete, or even more, depending on how busy the Azure region that you're using is at the time that you're doing this. So thanks very much for joining me again for this recording. In the very next recording, let's see what are we going to be covering. So that's 02. We'll move to 03 next. And in this case, we'll be doing implementing virtual machines. It's going to be 2 labs also. So lab number 1 will be about creating virtual machines in Azure. Lab number 2 will be about deploying Azure Virtual Machine using Azure Resource Manager templates. And is there lab C? And that will be it. And I'll see you in the next recording. Thanks very much and bye.